most frustrating things about the obvious truth of our world being flat and stationary is the ignorant people who have all been brainwashed on planet Earth their entire life, claiming to know the Earth is a globe for one reason or another, which is inherently explained in the flat Earth model, but is never ever adequately explained or even considered in the conventional globe model. I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate the point. People have circumnavigated the globe, so you are wrong and I am right. The irony and ignorance of this statement are so overwhelmingly comedic, it's difficult to respond to this point 10,000 times a day without spraying my coffee at my monitor. People see the stars apparently traveling in the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere, facing south, compared to the people in the northern hemisphere facing north. Therefore, we live on a globe. Columbus saw the masts of ships appear before the horizon line, therefore we live on a globe. NASA took pictures of the Earth from space during the Apollo missions, which have never before or since been repeated or replicated, and the astronauts on the said missions were not affected by the radiation barrier in the sky, because said barrier had not been discovered yet, so they didn't need to prepare for it and were magically relieved of its effects because it was yet to be discovered. These are just a few of the nonsensical arguments that typical globe earthers will try to use and debunk the flat Earth. Now let's get something straight from the beginning. You inherently cannot debunk the truth, just like you cannot prove a lie to be factual. The two ideas are mutually exclusive with their respective premise, and therefore only the truth can be irrefutably proven and never debunked, and lies will always be ultimately debunked and disproven. This is how the scientific method, or really the zetetic process, or the human experience in general work, thanks to a very powerful and intelligent creator who certainly seems to have a sense of humor, if nothing else. So to answer many of the questions I get thousands of times per week, I'm going to have to give a quick overview of the typical flat Earth model so that people can understand how the globe model has taken control of the way we view certain facts and mislead us into believing certain observations are only possible on a globe Earth. I should preface this by stating that not all flat earthers agree on every detail of the model. There are certain things that we all certainly do agree on, which, for example, one fact, the Earth doesn't possess 1 degree of curvature and is also stationary, ergo, the Earth is a stationary plane, ergo, cannot possibly be a spinning globe, since a stationary plane is mutually exclusive with a spinning globe. Capiche? So imagine, for hypothetical understanding of the flat Earth model, that our world is indeed a flat plane, which is disc-shaped. What lies beyond the outer edge of this disc shape is a mystery to us at this point, but suffice to say it could either end somewhere beyond the outer edge, or the plane of existence could stretch out to infinity, or anywhere in between those two options. As far as I know, the only man in history who has publicly been acknowledged to traveling beyond the outermost area known as Antarctica, who stated there were all sorts of prospects in terms of fuel and ore, but also a landmass greater than all of America beyond the South Pole, which is baffling indeed. We'll touch back on the expedition of Admiral Byrd here in a minute, but let's begin to describe the agreed facts surrounding the true correct flat Earth model. I should quickly mention that after the expedition of Operation High Jump of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the Antarctic Treaty was signed by all world military powers, which amounts to literal and legal keep-out signs regarding the southernmost region, aka Antarctica. So if you can imagine, the disk shape of our world is like a dartboard, with the North Pole in the center, bullseye. The next ring out is the northern hemisphere, the next ring out is the southern hemisphere, and finally the outermost ring on the dartboard is called Antarctica on the typical globe model. You'll notice that the meridian lines emanate from the bullseye center and spread out at greater distances between one another the further out from the center you get, and you'll notice that these lines do not converge back into a point at the bottom of the globe. So if you can imagine standing in the 9-pi slice of the dartboard, north is down and to the right, while south is up and to the left. If you're in the 2-pi slice, then south is down and to the right, while north is up and to the left. So north is an arbitrary direction, depending on where you're standing in relation to the center, and south is always away from the center. If you study the military documentary, propaganda piece, surrounding Operation High Jump, you'll notice something peculiar about the expedition. See, 3 separate parties were sent from different starting points on the world and all headed south, and were to meet up in essentially the same area on the bottom of the globe, you see. One of the teams was lost and didn't arrive to where they were supposed to arrive when they were supposed to arrive, So just something to consider if you take into account the fact that we do not live on a globe and the meridian lines do not converge back into a point at the bottom of the globe that doesn't exist. Therefore, it's safe to assume the third party in Operation High Jump were many thousands of miles from the two teams, who essentially went in similar directions south, while the third team was going in a total opposite direction than the other two, south, and couldn't possibly arrive near the other two teams traveling south or away from the center in that particular direction. So the meridian lines simply are imaginary lines based on the time it takes the stars overhead to travel in space from one apparent point to the next apparent point. This is how hours and minutes are described on maps for navigators, and how hours and minutes are described in terms of time. See, the assumption is it takes so many hours or minutes for an object fixed to the Earth to travel around the axis. However, the opposite is the truth. It takes so many hours or minutes for the stars overhead to travel around the magnetic center, which is fixed upon the North Pole. But what about the lines of latitude? How do we get those imaginary curved lines which are supposedly indicative of a globe? Well, if you realize the dartboard analogy is true, then east and west are simply right angles to north and south. Totally arbitrary directions depending on your position in relation to the center. If you travel around a dartboard with a compass needle that always points towards the center, you could describe a circle on a flat plane simply by keeping your bearings with the stars and keeping your heading at right angles to north and south. See, the supposition that only a globe can be circumnavigated is completely fallacious. Therefore, the conclusion that we're circumnavigating our world equates to proof of a globe is also fallacious. A flat surface can indeed be circumnavigated and would necessarily produce the effects observed by mariners or pilots who travel at right angles to north and south, what will eventually describe a great circle on a flat plane. If you consider the dartboard model further, all of the stars are orbiting the magnetic center, which is fixed upon the North Pole, in the same direction. However, the stars are very distant, not nearly as distant as we're told in terms of millions of light years, but they are very distant objects, or they are fixed to a distant dome, according to how you think of it. So they sort of behave differently in terms of perspective, which is sort of a topic for another discussion. But if you are towards the inside of the map, facing towards north or towards the center, then the stars will appear to orbit in one direction. Now, if you turn around and travel beyond the equator, or beyond that center point of the dartboard, and face south or away from the center, now beyond the equator, the stars will appear to be traveling in the opposite direction, and there is not a central pole star which causes a tunnel pattern similar to that found in the north in the south. So, in other words, the North Star Polaris is unique in that respect. The fact that Polaris has been viewed well below the equator is proof that we live on a plane. If the world was indeed a globe, then the pole star should not be visible from south of the equator, but has indeed been documented by mariners visible as far south as Capricorn. Now, they would need to be looking through an arc of water many miles tall, simply impossible on a globe. Therefore, the tunnel pattern, which is created by focusing a time-lapse camera on Polaris, should only be apparent very near to the North Pole. Standing near the equator and focusing on the North Star should create a much different effect, which would appear like the stars were all making a giant arc overhead from horizon to horizon, and not a circular tunnel pattern which is visible from nearly everywhere north of Capricorn on the flat Earth facing north. The fact that Columbus witnessed the masts of ships appear over the horizon before holes appeared is a complete accordance with the natural laws of perspective and are not proof of a globe Earth. If a ship which has disappeared beyond the horizon or vanishing point is zoomed in upon with a magnifying telescope, the view of the vessel will be restored, which proves it has not gone around the curve of a ball Earth. Simply the laws of natural perspective affects objects directly in our line of sight differently than objects which are further away from our line of sight. In other words, if you look at a row of telephone poles, the area in your line of sight will appear to converge at a vanishing point much closer to you. However, the tops of the telephone poles will continue beyond that point and converge at a much more distant point. This is simply the natural law of perspective, which is apparent to anyone who cares to look at parallel lines critically. Columbus assumed the masts of the ships being visible prior to the ship's hull was proof of a globe. However, it was exactly proof of the contrary doctrine of the natural law of perspective on a flat plane. There are many, many lighthouses here on a flat Earth, which are living, breathing proof that the world's lack of sphericity, as the light from a lighthouse should be pointed out into space from the vantage point of a distant ship, However, the light from a lighthouse travels parallel to the horizon for many, many miles. Any observer or light source is compelled to adhere to the laws of perspective and not the laws of a globe Earth. See, our ability to view to infinity on the flat Earth is impossible regardless of how much altitude is gained. Our angle of attack on the horizon will always determine our visible distance, which is also affected by the atmosphere which exists near the ground on the Earth. But for a lighthouse to be seen 50, 60, 70 miles away, I'll just give a quote of an exact example from Zetetic Astronomy, Earth Not a Globe, 1865. Quote, "In the Times newspaper of Monday, October 16th, 1854, an account of Her Majesty's visit to Great Grimsby from Hull, the following paragraph occurs. Their attention was first naturally directed to a gigantic tower which arises from the center pier to the height of 300 feet and can be seen 60 miles out to sea. The 60 miles, if nautical, and this is always understood when referring to distance at sea, would make 70 statute miles, to which the fall of 8 inches belongs to each mile squared, and as all observations at sea are considered to be made at an elevation of 10 feet above the water, for which 4 miles must be deducted from the whole distance, 66 statute miles will remain, the square of which is multiplied by 8 inches, gives a declination towards the tower of 2,904 feet. Deducting from this the altitude of the tower, 300 feet, we obtain the startling conclusion that the tower should be at the distance at which it is visible, 60 nautical miles, more than 2,600 feet below the horizon line. There's no possible way for lighthouses to be visible from over 60 miles away on a spherical Earth. There's no way for the North Star to be visible south of the equator on a sphere Earth. There's no way for 2 flights traveling from, say, New York to LA and back from LA to New York could possibly have identical duration if the face of the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles per hour eastward, or even 750 miles per hour eastward. Doesn't matter how fast the Earth is not spinning, the flights should be wildly different in terms of duration on any spinning sphere. The fact that the North Pole Star is visible in line with the wobbly axis of the globe is an impossible phenomenon. The constellations being fixed in their alignments for all of recorded history is impossible in the Big Bang universe, where all galaxies are accelerating in opposite directions at mind-boggling speeds. NASA has been caught faking their footage and using their immense budget of over $18 billion a year to create rather crappy low-budget films of spacewalks and the like aboard the International Space Station, sending bogus data and numbers to astronomers for them to endlessly sift through in amazement and wonderment. The world we live on is and has always been a flat, stationary plane, unlike anything we can observe in the night sky with a telescope. Our world is wholly unique, just as we are unique and every last living creature, including the plants, are unique. What lies beyond the outer edge of that dartboard is a huge mystery, and until we can get the Antarctic Treaty abolished, there will never be a full, free, sovereign geodetic survey done of the southernmost region, which by all accounts and reckoning of free mariners during the 1800s was much wider round than the equator. You realize all world military powers have been in conjunction to keep the public mind away from the southern region, and remarkably so. There are some people suggesting that we need to focus on the north region, and I agree. I think we need to focus on both the northern and southern regions of our world, and for a few reasons. There's compelling evidence that the magnetic polarity of our force field, generated and emanating from the North Pole or center bullseye, which radiates up and out in all directions, ending at all points in the outermost edge of the dartboard or the southernmost region. If the magnetic polarity has the ability to reverse itself, which it has been argued it does, we very well may need to travel north to get towards the outer edge. As I understand it, the North Pole star Polaris is indeed in the center, and the outermost edge is south or in any direction in a straight line away from the center. There appears to be some type of electromagnetic force compelling all the weightless objects in the sky, aka the sun, the moon, the stars, to orbit the magnetic center. Bits of such fall to the ground, apparently in the form of meteorites, if those are true. Again, only certain elements of this can we prove conclusively, and we must fill in many gaps with conjecture, so I don't think any one single person, myself included, has everything about this correct. We're learning new things every day, and our accepted paradigm has been so perverted and skewed for so long. It takes a fool to firmly cling to any belief system, as our senses are easily manipulated and our ideas easily misinformed. The zetetic process is the cure for this, as science has been hijacked by theoretical physics, which has no basis in reality and is indeed demonstrably false. Thank you. way we view certain facts and mislead us into believing certain observations are only possible on a globe Earth. I should preface this by stating that not all flat earthers agree on every detail of the model. There are certain things that we all certainly do agree on, which, for example, one fact, the Earth doesn't possess 1 degree of curvature and is also stationary, ergo, the Earth is a stationary plane, ergo, cannot possibly be a spinning globe, since a stationary plane is mutually exclusive with a spinning globe. Capiche? So imagine, for hypothetical understanding of the flat Earth, one of the most frustrating things about the obvious truth of our world being flat and stationary is the ignorant people who have all been brainwashed on planet Earth their entire life, claiming to know the Earth is a globe for one reason or another, which is inherently explained in the flat Earth model, but is never ever adequately explained or even considered in the conventional globe model. I'll give actual. The two ideas are mutually exclusive with their respective premise, and therefore only the truth can be irrefutably proven and never debunked, and lies will always be ultimately debunked and disproven. This is how the scientific method, or really the zetetic process, or the human experience in general, work, thanks to a very powerful and intelligent creator who certainly seems to have a sense of humor, if nothing else. So to answer many of the questions I get thousands of times per week, I'm going to have to give a quick overview of the typical flat Earth model so that people can understand how the globe model has taken control. I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate the point. People have circumnavigated the globe, so you are wrong and I am right. The irony and ignorance of this statement are so overwhelmingly comedic, it's difficult to respond to this point 10,000 times a day without spraying my coffee at my monitor. People see the stars apparently traveling in the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere, facing south, compared to the people in the northern hemisphere facing north. Therefore, we live on a globe. Columbus saw the masts of ships appear before the horizon line, therefore we live on a globe. NASA took pictures of the Earth from space during the Apollo missions, which have never before or since been repeated or replicated, and the astronauts on the said missions were not affected by the radiation barrier in the sky, because said barrier had not been discovered yet, so they didn't need to prepare for it and were magically relieved of its effects because it was yet to be discovered. These are just a few of the nonsensical arguments that typical globe earthers will try to use and debunk the flat Earth. Now let's get something straight from the beginning. You inherently cannot debunk the truth, just like you cannot prove a lie to be fact.